I concur pretty much with what John Lentz said because it's pretty accurate. My only take on the governor's trip is that the governor did a good thing. He definitely did help the state of New York with respect to trade with Cuba, albeit I would have done it differently. I would have added more time. But, you know, the governor was in a position where he was going to be criticized no matter how he did it, whether if it was too long, too short. But at the end of the day, he did help the state of New York gain a foothold in Cuba. What we're doing here at Gotham is creating really an opportunity for businesses and people who want to go to figure out how they can take advantage of the Cuba business opportunity, what's possible legal for them to do now, what might be possible for them to do in the future. At least get that information because you have varying levels of interest. I'm going to move through this presentation rather quickly just for the interest of time and allow at least for some questions, but this should give you a little bit of a background. So the couple of reality checks that, you know, everybody's excited about Cuba, and it's like, well, there's great optimism, and I call it, you know, there's cautious optimism. There's definitely, I was in Cuba in March, and I had never seen as many Americans traveling there, and I also could feel the energy that you feel when change is about to happen, and there's this kind of cautious, guarded optimism. What does that change really mean? But there's still an embargo. There's still travel restrictions, and fortunately, Cuba was removed from the terror list by President Obama earlier this month, and that will have in the short to medium term will create the opportunities to actually bring the cost of a telephone call to Cuba down and create the mechanisms to remove a 10% surcharge on U.S. dollar foreign exchange. But again, Cuba is a poor but proud nation with much to offer the U.S. and the world. Cubans and Americans actually like each other, admire each other's culture, language, and people. And I think that's the greatest strength, and that's something to be hopeful for the future. And so these are conditions where opportunities lie for a better future for both countries, engage and change, open up to one another. So not to get into it in depth for the sake of time, but December 17th is considered St. Lazarus Day. And those of you who are not Catholic, St. Lazarus was raised from the dead by Jesus Christ. And so it was sort of interesting that that was the day that relations were restored between the U.S. and Cuba. And it was also the day that Alan Gross was finally freed. And there was a prisoner exchange between some Cuban spies that we had for a Cuban who was spying for the Americans in Cuba, and there was an exchange there. So all of these things happen, and really things move very quickly. Travel has opened up, and there's literally 12 categories of travel, and you can fit into this, and you need the idea of when you hear the term general license, it is because Cuba is a sanctioned country. There is an embargo. So bureaucratically, there has to be an exception made, and that's the license. And basically what happened here is that the Office of Foreign Assets Control, which is a division of the Treasury Department, promulgated these regulations to allow for those exceptions. Just a photo from the airport. You know, we're about to board from Miami, and there's Cuba from the plane. And we can do more with Cuba now. So more remittances can be given to Cubans from, you know, let's say you go to Cuba, you become friends with Juan or Juanita. and you want to send them some money to help them fix their house or whatever, you're able to do that. You're able to give more money. There is now more than over $1 billion annually in remittances to Cuba. They've opened up now that you can bring building materials for private residential construction. So you can bring literally a can of paint, help somebody paint their house or whatever, bring them building materials. And there is the U.S. policy has been now to really promote and support the emerging private sector in Cuba. Very important because there will be very big business opportunities, I believe, there. What can we do right now with Cuba? You can sell agriculture and food. Basically, if it grows, it can be sold to Cuba, and that is a checklist. I mean, we'll make this presentation available to whomever wants it. City and state will have a copy of it. And what is happening now is that people are developing farms. This is a farmer who does organic farming, and he supplies the local markets, but he also supplies the restaurants, some of these paladars, with fresh, locally sourced produce, and it's pretty good, I got to tell you. So what's going on in the private sector? Right now, 500,000 Cubans are in this private sector. That's scheduled to become more than 40% of the 11.27 million people. I mean, what you can see in the long run is that there's going to be changes in Cuba when you have half the population privately employed in the long run. So there's going to be changes. There's 181 different categories, professions, services right now. But again, the most popular ones are the bed and breakfast, casa particular, the artisans, and the restaurants. And you can see some of these, like on TripAdvisor. There you'll see the hotels, some bed and breakfasts rated in restaurants, and most of them are privately run, the top ones. What gave me some hope for the future was a Cuban restaurant owner approached me and he said, Antonio, I would like to hire you to represent me in the United States. And I looked at him and I'm saying, that's interesting. What do you want to do in the United States? He says, I want to register my restaurant as a brand. He says, I want to one day have a branch of my restaurant in New York, in Miami, in Los Angeles, and I want to have business partners with that. And I go, well, that's an ambitious dream. I said, but right now the reality is I have to ask permission from my government. I got to get a license so I can accept a payment from you so that I can even perform a legal service for you. I have to get a license for that. I said, but the good news is you fit the parameters of the kind of, the people that I'm sure will get the license and we'll get your trademark registered. And so I said, I don't think anybody from the U.S. will be able to invest in your restaurant, but you can certainly begin to meet people and develop the relationships that you need for what's to come, what I would anticipate very, sooner than later. The embargo is going to be gone. All of this stuff is moving very quickly. I'm encouraged by what's happening in the Congress. So there's this big private sector that's developing. There's a very famous restaurant, the Borrero del Medio, famous because that's where Ernest Hemingway used to go have his mojito. Everybody who goes to Cuba first, that's a must visit. Now, this is at the restaurant, at one of the best restaurants, these privately run. It's called Mediterráneo Havana, and that was our group. And then they have a facility right near the water in Old Havana where they have all the artisans and the handicrafts, and all the artwork is there. And many of these goods now are allowed to be imported if they're produced by the private sector, with the exception of the things that are on this list. But it is still a significant opening that we've created these carve-outs so that, like, for example, this gentleman who builds beautiful humidors, if you wanted to sell Cuban-made humidors, there's a mechanism now, at least on the U.S. side, for you to import those humidors from this guy. Challenge for this guy is there isn't a mechanism for him yet to put it on a cargo plane or on a ship, because the Cuban government still has to develop and create the mechanisms for exporting their products and allowing their private sector to do that. So, like in this case, if you wanted to do business with this gentleman, you literally would have to bring like the duffel bag and the extra thing and pay the extra freight and the extra added baggage and make sure you have your paperwork to show to U.S. Customs. But there's lots of beautiful handiwork. So, you know, when you look at the issues about Cuba and the United States, what are our policy aspirations with respect to Cuba? We want stability. We want a predictable and stable immigration. We don't want another Mariel boat lift. We want national security. We want good drug trafficking interdiction. We have those kinds of arrangements with the Cubans. We'd like them to be a reliable trade partner. We'd like to build human rights, improve human rights over there. And we want to change the perception, the relationship with Latin America in general, because you know, Latin America seeks partnership with us and not to be subservient to the United States or a client of the United States. They want partnership with us. They consider us, you know, we're all part of this region, the Western Hemisphere. Simon Bolivar has this great line, and I describe it to you. He says, "We are all sons of America." And I think that when he said that, it meant both North and South America. So what are the challenges? There are competing claims, existing investments. Spain is there, Mexico, Venezuela, Russia. We've had a regime change policy that really has not really helped us. And you have to ask, well, why do we do this for Cuba for all these issues, but not China, Vietnam, or Saudi Arabia that are, or other authoritarian regimes? Aspirations of the Cuban government with respect to the United States, they're looking for their consolidation of power, legitimacy. They want the U.S. to divorce from the notion of regime change as an official policy. They want to be internationally recognized. They want to assure their constituency economic progress. They want to continue their program of guaranteeing health and education. They want to generate goodwill, and they want access to markets and financing. So where do you fit? Where do I fit now in the Cuba business opportunity? There are three levels, as I said originally. I've always wanted to visit Cuba, and I'm curious about the possibilities. Or I have a business that could potentially offer in goods and services to Cuba or Cuba private sector right now. And third, I'm interested in doing business in the future when the embargo lifts. So, and something we're proud at Gotham is we have a good team. And when you're looking at, well, who do I consult with? Who do I work with? Because there's a lot of people that say they have all kinds of experience and so forth. You have to ask, these are key questions to ask anybody when it deals with Cuba. When was the last time they were in Cuba? How many trips have they made to Cuba? What was their level of business, mentions in the media, their interactions, and the breadth of their clientele and experience? And to quote a Cuban official, he said, there are those who were here before December 17th and those who come after. And so that's a very important thing. It's obviously if you're looking at Cuba as a place that you think you're going to do business, you want to deal with people who were there before December 17th. That doesn't mean that you can't. I'm very proud of this as well, that I've lost count, but probably more than 30 trips to Cuba since 1999. I've been to various, Allenport is the Cuban agency that does the actual negotiations for mass purchases of commodities and food. And I've participated in those negotiations in a delegation. The Havana has an international trade fair. That's another thing that's an opportunity for people. They have it every November. And that's another good way to get a sense of what's hot, what's being sold, what's on the market, and so forth. I've led agricultural trade missions for clients, telecom, and worked with Governor Bill Richardson, Senator Tom Udall of New Mexico, Secretary of Agriculture of New Mexico, and have provided legal counsel on Cuban assets control compliance matters and been quoted in the media frequently, and I'm also the editor of a blog called uscubapolitics.com. What's the Cuban approach to business? Well, they prefer to deal directly with business owners and the decision makers. So the fact that the CEO, much to the governor's credit, the fact that the CEOs of these large corporations were the ones that went down there was a good signal, because that means that there's a very good chance that those deals are going to get the follow-through they need and come to fruition. You also have to think incrementally, step by step. It's really a confidence-building approach. There's not going to be anything done very quickly. It's really a process. And due to the fact that there's great interest in Cuba right now, they pick and choose who they're going to deal with, and it's all about price, price, price. And even though, New York is there, it's been in the news, there's this business delegation from Texas that's there. There's a delegation from Great Britain that's in Cuba trying to promote business there. So there's competition, and the Cubans are in a unique, fortunate position right now, being able to pick and choose. However, the onus will be on them to deliver and come through and put together good deals, so that way people feel that it has been worth, and on their balance sheet, that it's been worth the investment to put the time and resources to getting a deal done there. And unfortunately, until the embargo is lifted, we are at a disadvantage. And so what else they're looking at? Who is committed to they're looking at you and go, is this person going to be doing just a one-shot deal, or are they interested in the long-term and long-term approach? And they will look at you, does your business potentially pose a political risk to Cuba? Like, one of the reasons why telecom and internet is an issue is, well, we all know that it's very easy to monitor what's going on, and as Gerson pointed out, everybody's Big Brother is watching you. It doesn't matter whether it's the U.S., Cuba, but Big Brother is watching you. So it is a confidence-building approach. And right now, for the business, there are two end users in Cuba. It's either the Cuban government, which administers all these state-run agencies, or you have this nascent private sector. What are the aspirations of Cubans? What basically Cuban people want are stability, a better life. They want a chance at economic prosperity. They want housing. They want health and education. They want their sovereignty respected. They want to feel that everything that they've sacrificed for, they've received some kind of vindication. They don't want any vendettas, and they want to strengthen family ties. I think one of the most important things, and I've always encouraged Cubans that have left or left a long time ago to go back. It's actually a very healing thing. It's a spiritual thing. It's a homecoming, and actually, I've seen it change people's lives when for the folks that do go back. And you wonder what's going on at the airport. That's a picture of what it looks like at the airport every day. You'll see people embracing in tears that this is a relative or someone that they haven't seen. It isn't full of soldiers with machine guns and all that. It's just people waiting to greet their families and loved ones and crying at finally being able to hold one another. So that's the scene that you'll see at Jose Marti Airport. What are the aspirations of Cuban Americans? I think most Cuban Americans want to help. They also want justice. They want to return to the island. They want political standing. I think they want to be able to have influence. And I think if Cuban Americans particularly would concentrate in using the potential to use their economic influence for good in Cuba, that would be certainly much more, I think, productive than we've tried against sanctions and the embargo, and that has just been a big failure. And I think people want closure, and they're looking also for vindication and also, again, the family ties. So the contextual questions that you have to ask yourself in a business mindset. Okay, how does or will my business support all of these aspirations on both sides? You have to look with optics that looks at everything, not just with a narrow eye. And what can I do to support normalization, reapproachment? And that's going to be a fundamental thing, because I know people that have gone to Cuba and they want to start doing business, and then you have to tell them, look, you can't. There's an embargo. And the only way you're going to get rid of the embargo is by, doing the lobbying and contacting your congressmen and senators and so forth. And so we say here at Gotham, if you're not able to go with Governor Cuomo to Cuba, come with us. We're planning several trips, and we're going to be going at the end of June. It will be our first trip, and then we're probably doing another one in July, and then we'll evaluate again and do one in the fall. But we look forward to partnering and providing strategic guidance and counsel to businesses who want to, who have looked at Cuba as, hey, is there a business opportunity for me? And similarly, we look forward to working with the state of New York to help that, because we definitely want to help follow through so that the governor's trip really does mean something for New York businesses, because ultimately that's the most important thing, that we succeed if that trip turns out to bear real fruit. And I appreciate the help of Professor Pedro Freire from a very good law firm in Miami, in Ackerman Centerfit. Assemblyman Jose Rivera for his leadership in the New York State Legislature on Cuba. And I was just surprised. I think one of my criticisms of the trip is, why did the governor, he should have invited Assemblyman Rivera or other Latino politicians. But that neither here nor there. I'm sure what the governor might wind up doing is empowering and telling these various members and other government state agencies and people where there might be something that, hey, go to Cuba and follow through. And thanks to my partners, Brad, Gerson, David Schwartz, Perry, Alcocker, and Gotham. Thanks. Well, right now, there isn't anything legal for a U.S. company to do, but absolutely Cuba has an energy challenge like most countries, and I think there's a great opening and opportunity for solar, for waste to energy type programs, and solar, wind, and even what the Cubans can do with their sugarcane crop is do what the Brazilians have done and start building their sugarcane ethanol capacity. And the United States, actually, we have the technology on how to build those kind of refineries, but we can't sell it yet because of the embargo. But there's going to be great opportunities to do that kind of development. And, I think things look hopeful that we're going to get to that point.
Any other questions?
Is there a fear that capitalism might corrupt the Cuban culture?
Would you want to each take one?
That's always been a fear. That's why, remember, the context of the historical happenings in Cuba is because when Batista was in power, the historical context, and without delving too much into it, and I think, Jonathan, you studied it also, is because of the fact that Batista made it a place where the people could come and do business. I mean, the whole thing about not only American legitimate companies, but there was also the underworld actually, going there to do business and owning Cuba. Fidel's rise is basically as a result, or the Castro regime and all the, there were a small band of people who would it was the middle class who actually, rebelled against Batista. Because Batista was just, a very corrupt president of Cuba, and Cubans just couldn't stand it. So I don't think that I don't think they're going to go through that historically again or allow for that, so that there's a caution on that. So I think that, for example, Antonio, who's been traveling there, done over 30 trips, it's going to be very difficult. I think they're not even at the point that even a person who's been that many times there, they're going to trust, because they need to see, it's one thing on a one-to-one with Antonio Martinez or John Lentz or Gerson Borrero or whatever, but they understand that this is a capitalist nation who wants to own things. The United States doesn't like to share. The history in Latin America is to be, and the Caribbean and other parts of the world, is for the United States to own. The United States will give you $1, but they want $1 million back. Simple as that. They understand the United States better, I would dare say, than the United States understand their regime right now. Simple as that. I also think again, I've never been to Cuba. I know the system. I interviewed Ricardo Alarcón, who presided over the National Assembly for almost 30 years. Ricardo Alarcón is retired. He's from one of the confidants of Fidel Castro. I interviewed him when I was editor at El Diario, had a very honest exchange. The only thing, they've discussed many possibilities. The Cubans don't have a problem doing business with the United States. They do it with other people, but on an equal footing. when have you known that the United States does business with anyone on equal footing? So that's going to be the problem.
Yeah, and I think that's what I was speaking towards, that we have to look at our policies with Latin America. Latin America wants partnership. That's different than being a customer, a client, or subservient. Partnership, because there's an aspect of admiration and respect that they want out of the relationship. So it's something I think that's going to definitely evolve. But it's clearly, I would also say that they know that their system has real problems and challenges. But there's a human aspect to it where nobody likes to have it rubbed in their face that they've made a mistake or that they're wrong or that they are humiliated. I think we have to look at it, our diplomacy is, and similarly, it's like with anybody. If you're going to be friends with someone, you engage them in a different way. You help them. You give them the option. You show them how to do things differently, or give them the choice, or that kind of thing. But to isolate, humiliate, that is a total. That's just that won't work.
And to that point, just to add a couple of things. It's not just the Cuban experience with the U.S. It's all of Latin America, and then there's a long history of CIA-backed forces overthrowing leftist leaders, democratically elected leaders. Castro, in a way, is the exception in that he resisted and stayed in power, and so there is a very deep distrust, as well as that friendship at the same time. You have the ties. They talked about Jose Marti, who's their George Washington figure, and their airport's named after him. And he spent a lot of time in New York City. And there are those connections. There's an apocryphal story that Fidel Castro was offered a tryout with the New York Yankees. I don't know if it's been verified or not, but they play baseball. They don't play soccer, unlike any other Latin American country.
And yet, one of the biggest if you go to Cuba on any mission, I found out if you go to City and State TV, you will see that I did 8 interviews prior to Jonathan taking off with Governor Cuomo of a person who's been going to Cuba 3 decades also, Mickey Melendez. He's an activist, Puerto Rican, half Cuban, half Puerto Rican, from New York. He's a socialist. He's a declared socialist in the United States. He's part of the Young Lords, if you ever heard of the Young Lords. He maintains relationships with Cuba, but he takes teachers. As a matter of fact, there's an additional trip that he invited me to with doctors that he's going to take come October. Then there'll be another one. These are trips that are cultural in nature and deal with literature, art, nothing to do with business. This is an exchange between people. So among the 40 people that he took, it's an interesting part that he says, Gerson, do you know what's the biggest thing that we do that I ask everybody to do that wasn't revealed in as a matter of fact, Brian Terry, who's our video person, we went to a briefing they had to these 40 people that were traveling. I didn't know that the one gift that they asked, he says, please bring a soccer ball, to go to your point. So the kids who never know what soccer is, and each one gave a soccer ball they went to neighborhoods as part of their trip. These people weren't looking for business. They don't want to do business. They want to have friendship and learn of the education system, learn of what it is that's worked there. So they take a soccer ball, and these kids go wild, and they go to different neighborhoods. Just a plain freaking soccer ball. So I think that what we have to understand about Cuba is the fact that there is much that we don't know. There is much that has been perpetuated by this ongoing campaign by Cuban Americans who have every right to hate the Castro brothers, who had to leave their homes, who there were properties were confiscated, their business were taken over. So we understand that. But the reality is that, like President Obama so aptly has declared and we cannot continue to live in the past. We got to move forward. I think the Castro brothers, because they still run the country, have said, we're not going to live much longer. Or maybe Fidel will live to be 200. But the fact is, you never know. But the fact is that there is a change coming. I don't know how fast it's going to be. It may not be in our lifetime, but I know that this thing is gone. I think that President Obama just took it to another level.